Hey everybody. Sorry we're a minute late there. Before we kind of kick in full, I want to just give a couple of administrative updates. First of which, I know we get a lot of questions regarding continuing education certificates. Just know that we will send those out via email. It's usually a day or two after the webinar, and we'll provide those in addition to the on-demand links and the webinar content that we'll be providing kind of on the back end of this. So again, just administratively look for that stuff in the next day or two. Secondly, all of our webinars, but this one in particular, I would really encourage you to make it interactive. So I'm going to draw your attention to somewhere in your GoToMeeting situation here, you'll have a question box. Please, as the webinar progresses, type in questions for either Matthew or myself, and allow those questions to filter through. We'll cover those kind of at the end of the presentation, but we'll let them queue throughout the course of the presentation. Let's see. I think I had one more thing. Nope, that's it. I think that's the end of the administration. So I'll kick it off. I'm Andy Zimmerman. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at Grace Technologies, and we're happy that you're here to join us on this kind of non-traditional webinar. For those of you who know Grace, we have spent the last 30 or more years installing devices and helping our customers keep their industrial control panels safer, smarter, and more productive. And we've really done that through three main product lines. Our GracePort and Grace PESD lines are designed to keep electrical workers away from and safe from live voltages. And then more recently, our GraceSense or predictive maintenance lines of technology are there to allow maintenance and reliability personnel to detect problems with their critical infrastructure before those problems become severe. And in that kind of 30 years of experience, we've really started to see questions that go above and beyond the kind of safety and reliability messaging that we're used to, and really started to talk to customers in recent years about their needs for security within that industrial environment. And so, those questions can come in two main ways. First of which is just knowing when somebody has accessed a control panel unsafely, right? You got a contractor coming into a facility and those contractors, maybe aren't following electrical safety protocol. So that's thing number one. But then thing number two is actually knowing when there's access to those panels that's unauthorized, right? When you have somebody who's in there either to potentially steal intellectual property that's inside that panel or to potentially mess with an industrial process. So, in those lines, I'm really excited to bring Matthew Carr to you today. He's the head of research and technology at Adamcell Group, and has spent his career doing operational security for IKEA, IBM, and Orange Cyber Defense. And I'm just really excited to hear Matthew's thoughts today about kind of how today's industrial control systems are both vulnerable, and then how we can defend against those vulnerabilities. So with that, I'm going to close my mouth and let Matthew talk. So.
Oh, thanks, Andy. I really appreciate that. And I will add, well, firstly, I've been a little bit sick, so if I cough a little bit, please excuse me. Mike is also much sicker than I today, so he couldn't join. But onto what you're talking about, that's in fact, as you know, one of the reasons why we started talking, because I really sort of appreciate the products that Grace Technologies offers in that safety domain, and a lot of the solutions are above and beyond what I've seen in the field, and I'm glad that those questions are starting to be asked. It kind of for those that are wondering, like, why are those questions being asked now, I will touch on that in this presentation, but one of the reasons that isn't in the presentation but plays a massive role in why cyber physical incidents are a big issue is because as consumer or even industry 4.0 technology has come down in price point and also exponentially increased in complexity and solution offerings, so it has on the offensive side. So I have actually a device here that this can clone access cards, this can intercept signals, replay signals. This type of technology 10 years ago was reserved for nation states, right? It would cost you north of $10,000 for something like that. This is a network interception device that can exfiltrate over 4G LTE. Again, 10 years ago, this would have been reserved for the best spy agencies in the world. Now you can literally buy this online. This is an intercepting device for GPS and mobile sort of 3G, that kind of communication, GNSS, that type of stuff. We also have devices that can intercept CCTV and video conferencing devices and send it back remotely. And all of this stuff you can buy off the shelf, and things like covert cameras and recording devices. Again, all of this stuff completely accessible, really cheap. For today, less than $1,000 is going to get you a complete espionage kit, if you like. That again, if you're looking to do this stuff 10 years ago, it was very restricted, very hard to get, very expensive. Hackers back then had to like make their own devices, right? And that, but today, unfortunately, there's two sides to this. Fortunately for security practitioners, more people have accessibility to tools that allows them to test more complicated things where there is a sort of like higher threshold in terms of knowledge needed. But the flip side to that is that, of course, bad people that want to do bad things can also get access to this stuff. And really coming back to the point, that's where this issue has really started to grow and come to the forefront, because even, I think it was about 3 years ago, I'm not going to name the nation state, but a certain adversarial nation state that we would not consider a friend was caught in a allied country, and when their vehicle was stopped and searched, they found a lot of the kit you see here today. And this was military intelligence that was caught red-handed, but they weren't using sort of advanced tools that you might assume they would use. They were using this sort of off-the-shelf consumer stuff. So that's a little bit of background into like why this is becoming more of an issue, but I will cover that today in defending critical infrastructure. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the sort of 5 stages of attacking critical infrastructure, and then don't worry, for the people that are here want to know how to protect it, I'm going to cover some very high-level macro things that you can do. I will say I'm not a good salesperson. I'm not even a salesperson, so I'm not going to be trying to sell you anything today. I'm a technical researcher, and I just want to share my experience and what I consider to be things that can help you. So with that said, first things first, this is an email address for us. If you want to reach out and talk security, happy to do so. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be covered here today that might leave more questions than answers. So again, feel free to reach out and contact me. So my name is Matthew Carr. I'm head of research and technology at AtomCell. My background is in pen testing and red teaming for likes of IBM, Orange Sign Defense, Warner Bros, the Home Office. I've spoken at all the large conferences around OT security and cyber security, such as DEFCON B-sides. I hold security clearance to test military signals protection devices. Again, these devices are used on core critical infrastructure. I've discovered thousands of vulnerabilities over my career, but the most notable being 3 major 0 days that affected national security. I specialize in full impact adversarial simulation, and I'm a keen capture the flag payer where I specialize in exploit development, web and reverse engineering. So naturally, people always ask me, what is full impact adversarial simulation? Well, unlike penetration testing or sort of compliance-based security testing, which is very scoped, then you have red teaming, which is sort of much further beyond that. There's less of a scope. Full impact adversarial simulation is beyond red teaming. So it's from the assumption of any means necessary. So our goal is to emulate nation state activity, hostile nation state activity. Our goal is to emulate advanced organized crime groups, or as we say, tech-enabled crime. So we utilize a number of tools and techniques, and as you can see, this is a little bit of our kit here. There's a bunch of different stuff from cell phone jammers, voice changers, but there is nothing that's off the table. In some cases, if we're asked to gain access to certain information systems, it might actually be easier to covertly access that building, take the server and forensically image it than it would be to actually hack it. This is where I spend most of my time, in places like this, often places that actually don't have windows, but that's okay because I also get to be around a lot of cool technology and, you know, practice, you know, our techniques and really push the boundaries of what's possible. But today we're obviously talking about a very serious subject, and the serious subject wouldn't be complete without a pie chart. And so don't worry, this is the only one I've got, but it's important that we get it out of the way. As you can see, we have a mix between not eaten and eaten pie. I think given such a serious subject, this here is to obviously give us information about the pie that has been eaten, but to also, it's here as a reminder that while this is serious business, we don't need to be stressed out about it too much. We don't need to fearmonger. Yes, there are issues, but we can certainly deal with them together. The fact is, though, that organizations and nation states have never been under great threat of cyber physical attack for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier about the technology and the price of which has come down for the attacker, but also because of things like Industry 4.0 and the interconnectivity of these systems. So obviously in industry and critical infrastructure, now we have cloud computing, now we have big data, we even have virtual reality, we certainly have industrial IoT, augmented reality, robots, machine learning. All of this stuff is brilliant. From a futurist point of view, I absolutely champion it and support it. We need it. I'm not one of these security people that say, we shouldn't have it, let's keep it air gap. No, that's not the right answer. There's certainly many gains to be had by employing this type of technology, but at the same time, with great power comes great responsibility. So we also have an opportunity now during this Industry 4, Industry 5, or Industry X, as I call it, revolution, then we can actually start to build things that are secure by design. And really, that's the way I think this is going, is that we're going to see more OEMs like Grace integrating security solutions and features into products rather than sort of where we're at now, which is a lot of third-party solutions. But to be honest, where we're at today is better than we were 10 years ago when a lot of the big players that are around, even like companies like Dragos, they weren't even there. Like Robert Lee was just Robert Lee. You know, Darktrace, who were they? You know, you hadn't heard of any of these companies because they just weren't around. And so we've definitely come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. It can be difficult to defend against these cyber physical attacks, but steps must be taken to ensure that defenses are in place. But why is it difficult? Well, it's difficult because security is difficult anyway. So I'm not going to downplay that. But it's not easy, but it's simple. And that doesn't mean there's not a lot to it, but it means one can simply work through the steps and find solutions to a lot of the problems we face today. But especially in OT, one of the sort of biggest issues is the convergence of IT and OT. So obviously, as we have these smart networks, we're often connecting them via like traditional IT things like your TCP/IP or your wireless networks, or even regular servers, Linux or Windows servers. And so all this stuff is classic IT. On the other side, you have layer 1 to layer 3 kit. And this is, you know, a lot of people might be electromechanical engineers, let's say, come from an engineering background. And so rightly so, they don't understand IT cybersecurity, and they shouldn't have to. That's not their job. But the flip side to that is, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this happen, is you'll have IT security people that will come in and be like, yeah, just like, let's do an Nmap scan and check out your assets. Well, hang on a minute, some of that kit might not even be able to handle a simple SYN scan. So like, just don't do that. I've seen a lot of pen testers come into these environments and like actually knock stuff offline because they don't know what they're doing, because it's very different to IT. Yes, there's similarities, but also on the OT side, there's many more protocols than we have on the IT side. And so what it means is that actually where these 2 points converge, we have a very small pool of talent that we can draw from. But the idea is that hopefully, you know, we can keep expanding that. We can keep educating some more IT people onto OT front, but also people like yourselves that work on the front line of these operations to at least, you know, be more aware, to start to employ the right tooling that you need to do the job. And I think together we can get there. It's difficult, it's a big problem, but it's not, you know, it's not one we can't overcome. But like, why should we care? Well, again, I'm sure most of you know, but for those who don't, the reason why we should care is that OT industrial technology is everywhere, from transportation, shipping, to renewable energy, to healthcare. I mean, in this one thing alone, from an adversarial point of view, there's so many microcontrollers and circuits and sensors, right? And these are all things that can be attacked. You have regular buildings, smart cities, smart offices, even dumb offices with building management systems, right? A lot of these have OT technologies inside. Then, of course, you have refineries and you have oil and natural gas. And so you can quickly see that, in fact, like when we have problems in this area, they're problems that can affect critical infrastructure. And we've actually seen this with a number of attacks over the years, like you know, some of these nation states attacks that knock grids offline. And there's even sort of grid outages where, like, we're not sure, was it a cyber attack or was it a cyber failure? We just don't know, because in fact, in a lot of these network deployments, like, there isn't the right technology to even be able to like do an incident response and be able to do that forensic analysis, because you know, at the end of the day, you can't manage what you can't measure, and you can't measure what you don't gather. So if you're not collecting that information, then you've got no way of telling after the fact. So to sort of summarize it, the main challenges are that there are vulnerable systems, because the fact is that a lot of these systems were not built vulnerable by design, but the older the system, they were built from an assumption that it will never be networked, like that it will never be connected to the internet, because that's what was thought at the time. And obviously now we're connecting things to the network, you start to have old technology that is internet routable, that is publicly accessible. Then we have the fact of the cyber physical dangers. So unlike a lot of IT, strictly IT domains, there's the old adage in OT security, if you can touch it, you can own it. So you also have the fact that a lot of these critical infrastructure sites, and even just infrastructure in a smart city, because of actually like where it needs to be deployed and what it does, it ends up being that a lot of kit can be physically touched or accessed by someone with bad intent. Then we have limited awareness, which we've just seen. But I actually do think we still have a shortage of the right tools and staff to solve some of these issues. Yes, sure, there are a lot of OT security solutions, but I still see a lot that don't cover like all the protocols that are required. And I see even more that don't look at, you know, things like the security, the RF spectrum, for example, sufficiently, to my mind anyway. So if we sort of take a minute to pause and think, like, about perspective and about risk management, this is an exercise I like to do in training, where it's like, take a look at this picture and like think, what do you see? I think for most people, the obvious answer is you see a car manufacturing line, right? And you're not wrong. You're absolutely right. But to an attacker, to someone with bad intent, I see a bunch of industrial kit to the right and to the left, right? Okay, it might not be networked, but it could have a local area network. It certainly has serial ports that I can tap into. A lot of these are left open and exposed. And in fact, a lot of new security practitioners don't even know what a serial port is. They wouldn't even know what baud rate means, right? But the fact is that in a lot of these scenarios, there's default credentials. I can just drop straight into a shell on the system. We also have these robotic arms. There's tons of microcontrollers, there's memory, there's CPUs in these things, in the cars themselves, in the smart technology, in the wireless networks, in the IT network, for the, you know, in the SCADA system. I mean, there is so much kit here that can be hacked. For an attacker, it looks more like a candy store than a car manufacturing line. So with that said, now we see the environment, we see the candy store, but we want to take the candy. Like, how do we do that? Well, we have this 5-step process typically, and actually this was taken from an NSA advisory that was released about a week ago. And I would totally agree with them on these 5 points. This is sort of exactly how control system intrusions occur. And what I'm going to actually do for you today is we're going to go through the 5 steps. I'm going to show you some examples. Hopefully not give any bad people any ideas, That's why in a lot of cases, I'm not going to go into details. I'm not going to give names. I'm not going to give links because, again, I do believe that in this area of research, a lot of the stuff that we come up with, we don't publish because I don't want to give bad people the tooling to hurt good people. So with that said, we will go through the points. So the first one is always to establish your intended effect and select a target. So like, why are we even doing this? Most people think of ransomware. Ransomware is like one small subsection of cyber espionage, if you like, or cyber attacks, because ransomware is a financially motivated thing. You have a whole range of attacks that are just about information gathering, right, and intelligence gathering. You have a whole range of attacks that are just about tactical disruption, economic terrorism, you know, even just a vendetta from someone who's technically enabled, or tech-enabled crime. Maybe you're just a good target, and there's another intent behind the attack. So, of course, firstly, like whoever is going to attack you is going to decide their intended effect. Then they're going to select a target. They may or may not know you already. But if they don't, there is again a subsection of attackers that will identify targets in different ways. And what do I mean by this? Well, let's say we wake up tomorrow and we find out that Somatic has a vulnerability available. You know, a CV is published and there's a remote code exploit. And basically, a remote code exploit means I can remotely execute code, or I can run commands remotely on that system. So that is sort of like the holy grail of hacking. Like you definitely want remote code execution, and we call that RCE. So you definitely want RCE on a system. So in this case, let's say we find out about this vulnerability and it's new. Well, then I can just go to somewhere like this, an internet search engine, and you can see port 161 Somatic. I can actually see all the targets. So don't think this is hypothetical. This happens all the time. And in fact, to the point, this process is massively automated. So there are certain nation states that have mainframe computing systems that will literally, when a vulnerability is around, they'll go and do this reverse search and they'll target every system that has that issue. Again, we can see more, we can see different subnets that are available to them. And then from there, we know that we can access the interfaces. In most cases, default credentials allow you to log in, more default credentials. In this case, we can actually update our own firmware. That's lethal because ultimately I can now backdoor commands and backdoor parts of the firmware to make it do what I want to do. And again, from a security defense point of view, you have to ask yourself, do we have that kind of visibility to be able to detect if someone modifies and backdoors firmware on our kit? From experience, I'd say not many people do. But so if you're one of the, say, 1% that do have that capability, great. And that's absolutely brilliant. And that's really, you know, for critical infrastructure where you want to be at. Again, more default credentials, we can modify pages. Then that's sort of a reverse lookup. Then people are going to do things like active scanning. So they're going to enumerate the internet and try and find vulnerable systems, try and find systems belonging to companies. So let's say that we're targeting Grace, and we'd want to understand all the infrastructure that Grace owns. So we might do, you know, enumeration like this. Then, of course, like once we have that information, we can correlate it with open source intelligence, and we can start to get an idea of the exact facility that we're looking at, you know, exactly where it is. And then, of course, actually access those systems again, because like most of them have default credentials. So you've seen us. Well, we haven't actually established the intended effect. We're actually going to do that in developing the techniques, again, because we're not actually really setting out to do this. So it's, of course, massively hypothetical. But we're actually going to look at our intended effect, step 3. But first, we'd want to collect intelligence about a target system. One way to obviously do that is through open data leaks. So, you know, the risk of data leaks in general is one of the biggest risks in cybersecurity. In fact, experts believe that as many of 50% of all cyber incidents relate to open data leaks. And what are open data leaks? Well, that could be something like your password. So there are data leaks as a service where people can basically buy and pay to get access to your information. And in fact, that's believed to be sort of the origin point of the Uber hack that happened about a week and a half ago. Someone actually purchased credentials, but it's not always credentials. In fact, data leaks, especially when it comes to industrial kit, can include user manuals that might include default passwords. It can include firmware that should be restricted to certain clients or industry, but has been, when I say leaked, it might just have improper access control. It might be available in a download section. But with that, I might be able to, well, we would almost certainly be able to find some kind of issue in the firmware. You might look for hard-coded passwords and tokens in the firmware. You might look for insecure functions of where it generates access tokens, or where it actually checks authentication. Is there like some logic we can exploit to bypass that? Or we might just look for classic security vulnerabilities like memory-based issues like buffer overflows, which is actually way beyond the scope of discussion today, so I'll leave that there. But it's a very interesting subject, and you know, a memory-based attack is typically one of the greatest ways to get what we mentioned earlier, remote code execution on the system. And then, of course, there's active and passive information gathering. So we can use enumeration tools. We could do it manually. You know, we could like literally look through every part of a system manually using an intercepting proxy that's going to record all our actions and traffic, so we can do analysis later. There's an array of tools to do this kind of stuff. So active enumeration, anyone that actually does have network security monitoring on their kit, what you're going to see is like over a weekend, you're probably going to have like 10 to 20,000 different IPs enumerating your network. So yeah, it happens with the time. But in this hypothetical scenario, we realize our threat intelligence tells us that we're actually being targeted by Anonymous. We ended up on the naughty list, and now we're being targeted. So in that case, this leak has actually been shared online. We can see all these email addresses for employees. Next, we're going to go to one of these sites that provides sort of data leak as a service. And here we're actually able to get our clear text credentials, at which point now, by simply doing some pre-enumeration, we now have some valid credentials to the infrastructure, which we're actually going to show here, because we're going to log in to the VPN. As you can see, we have a local internal IP address on the 10x network. So that really demonstrates that all you need in that sometimes the pre-enumeration is all you need to actually exploit and gain access to a network, right? In fact, more often than you like to think, that's actually all you need. So really, starting with what we call the hacker's perspective is massively important when it comes to security. But in terms of just general security, here's a little bit of a summary of the types of things that we'll see when enumerating systems and issues that can be abused. So this is all related to web-based exploitation, but you have things like database injection, broken access control and session management, exposed data and databases. What you see here, the numbers, we actually looked at this, we looked at 1 million different endpoints and products in 2017, and we looked at the same ones again in 2021. What you can see here is a slight improvement over time, but probably not as much of an improvement as we'd like to see, given the amount of money that's invested in security. But still, there is an improvement. But some of these ones, like security misconfiguration, still up well over, still over 50%, right? So like nearly 53% of all the targets we looked at had security misconfigurations of some sort. So that's a massive amount. That means that, you know, in this scenario, like it's really on the attacker's side. You know, they've definitely got the numbers in their favor. So now we've gone through steps 1 and 2. Now for step 3, we're actually going to want to develop these techniques and tools to navigate and manipulate the system. This is something we actually have a lot of experience in. So this is an article from 2018 around some research that we published in the register, and it's basically how we attacked a line of 4 lines of code. yes, it was just 4 lines of code. I hate to say, but actually I have a little bit of a demonstration of the general process. So when we're testing these exploits, obviously we don't run them on real lines. So we have toy rigs that we set up, all that are running legitimate real PLCs and OT devices, but the end unit is like, we'll have mini robotic arms, we'll have mini lines. Again, we can still prove that these things are possible. We just do it in a very safe manner. So what we're doing here is we wrote custom exploit framework, and really it's a rather non-event, but you see the light go off there, so we've killed that. So that's a piece of custom tooling that ran on a piece of hardware. Another piece of custom tooling that one might develop during this stage is this, what we call the PWN plug. It has multiple interfaces. It's capable of BTLE, LoRaWAN, Zigbee. Basically what it does is we plug it in. For all the electrical engineers out there, don't judge the insides of this. It's not designed to look pretty, and it's not for resale. It's a PWN plug, because contained within it is the ability to enumerate networks, to launch attacks, to really carry out any of the objectives that we identified in step 1 and 2. So this is the tooling that someone might develop in the techniques and tools to navigate and manipulate systems. In this case, this PWN plug has been developed to actually have what we call out-of-band exfiltration capabilities. So let's say we target an environment that has a security operations center and has 24/7 network monitoring, then we're not going to want to exfiltrate data out of that IT network or monitored network. So we're going to actually exfiltrate data out of band. We're going to use a protocol we know you don't use. We're going to use a medium we know you're not monitoring. And once we do that, then really you're not going to catch it, really what it comes down to. So again, this is one of the more difficult areas of OT security, is full spectrum RF monitoring and security. Something we are working on and researching, but so this is how I know firsthand it's a very difficult area for sure. So now we've established our intended effect and selected our targets. We've also collected intelligence, and as you can see, it's very quick. And in fact, step 2 has actually already given us step 4, right? So we've already got access to that system, and we've developed techniques and tools to navigate that. But now, presuming we hadn't actually got valid credentials in step 2, then this is the point at which we need to gain initial access to the system. This might be physical, which I'll cover shortly, but it might also be over things like the remote access link that we've seen. And again, what I'll show you here is now we're actually accessed the networks. We're on the internal VPN. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to connect our desktop. We're going to get our session here. But what you can see in we can't actually see it anymore because this terminal window is hiding it. But in the background, you see something called crack map exec. You can see it a bit there. What we've basically done is enumerated the SMB shares, so that it's a common network share technology from Microsoft. So as you can see, we've got access to this user. We're using RDP. Some people might be thinking RDP, isn't that going to be flagged? Actually, quite the opposite. Like when we use offensive tools and offensive tooling, that's likely to get flagged because everyone's looking for something like Mimikatz. Whereas like if you have a network that has a lot of engineers that are entering and maintaining, then something like our desktop is probably going to blend in real good. So once we've gained access to the system, we're then going to download our exploit kit. So again, this is part of what we made in step 3, right? But now in step 4, we've gained access to our target network, and it's time to actually run our technology. What we can do here, we can do a number of things. We can spawn shells, we can patch memory, we can actually dump password hashes, we can enumerate users. So what we're actually going to see here is we're going to go for number 7. So we're actually going to patch wdigest. We're going to start dumping the LSAS file. And what this means is ultimately, like, we're going to be able to extract hashes and tokens from service accounts, from domain administrators, local administrators. And some people might be thinking, oh, well, you've got to crack a hash. A hash is a one-way thing, right? Yeah, but there are many scenarios in which you can do something which is known as passing the hash. In this situation, what we're going to demonstrate here is something known as a golden ticket. So we're actually, rather than cracking a hash, rather than passing a hash, we're actually able to abuse a number of system primitives and abilities, and we're actually going to craft a golden ticket. As you can imagine, it's pretty much like Willy Wonka's golden ticket, except that you're not getting access to a chocolate factory. You're now a local administrator on this box, which, depending if you like chocolate or local admin, you decide which one is more important to you. I would say that, I've seen this a bunch of times, I would probably rather have Willy Wonka's golden ticket. But that said, I don't have Willy Wonka's golden ticket. I have this Kerberos golden ticket for evil taco user who's a local admin. So that really, we're at the point now where, you know, your SCADA system is my SCADA system, right? Especially if you're running Windows 10. And yes, at the time this was fully patched. So no, you cannot rely on things out of the box. I'm not knocking Windows. There's a ton of features that if you enable them and you set it up properly, it's gonna really help. But like, most people just don't do that. Most people don't enable these features. Most people don't even follow like Microsoft adversaries where it's telling you to do stuff. And in fact, you can actually get a lot of products that tell you to disable a lot of those features. That's definitely not a good thing. So we've seen sort of accessing an administrator, but another way to do that would be to actually upload our own web pages, our own firmware. So in this example, you can see that like we've actually able to like backdoor this web page, and as someone types the password, this is for demonstration purposes. Obviously, that wouldn't be plain text in the UI, but what it demonstrates is in the background, that password is then sent to our server and we rebuild it keystroke by keystroke. So it can be, from what we've seen, what we showed with getting a golden ticket is kind of like kicking the door in and holding a gun to someone, robbing them. It's very loud, it's very noisy. Some of these techniques are more discreet. It's more like sneaking in the back door. It's more like installing a listening device and gathering the intelligence you need to legitimately and laterally move to other systems that you might need valid credentials for. So we've gone from step 1 to 4. In most cases, in most targets I see, they're gonna fall by this point, right? That I'd say out of the 15 years I've been auditing sites and gaining access to them, probably a handful, maybe like 5 of those sites have had sufficient controls where it's like, I've got to shake someone's hand and be like, well done, yeah, job well done, this is great. You really have like defense in depth, and while it's not completely impenetrable, that's never should be the intent. I think it's completely unhackable. It's about detection and response, and the one way that you gain an advantage is by delaying someone and putting things up defense in depth, and like making me put more effort and resources into actually gaining access to your networks, and then hopefully during that time you can mount a sufficient response. Then finally, we're going to want to execute techniques and tools for our intended effect. So we haven't actually covered what the intended effect is yet, but it might be attacking the sensors, sensor spoofing, it could be something like Stuxnet, could be something like Industry Destroyer. We might want to attack sensors, we might want to bypass safety interlocks, power surges, flooding, over-pressurization, because the fact is that like when things go wrong in these environments, they go really wrong. So if it's hard to see in this picture, but like there's a guy in an orange hat down there, that shows you the scale. This actually almost started a major geopolitical incident, because they believed that it was targeted by a nation state. It turned out to be a faulty sensor, a cheap and faulty sensor. But it really does make you, hopefully it makes you ask yourself, like, do you even have the capability to determine, was it a cyber incident or a cyber attack? Was it a technical failure or was it a cyber attack? I think that's a really important question to be able to answer, because more often than not, I've seen cyber attacks being written off as technical failures, which is obviously doing you a disservice. It's not allowing you to like gather the intelligence, the threat intelligence, and be able to like mount sufficient responses and protect yourself. But a flip side of that is I've seen technical failures and people start freaking out and thinking that they're being attacked by a nation state, when really you just have cheap sensors and a bad network. So then, as I say, the sensors, we can easily spoof them. They can be intercepted and values modified. They may malfunction, and they can have their service or callbacks denied. Talking of sensors, you'll probably know what this is. This is a solenoid. It works by being electromagnetically charged, which is typically used to open gates and things. But the point of this is that we can highlight a point of assumption and risk management in these environments. And that is, like when it comes to managing risk, you don't know what you don't know. And also, you don't know if your preconceptions have influenced your decision making in managing risk. And an example of that would be, safe is safe, right? Well, from a certain point of view, not even safe is safe. So to highlight this point, we actually got a couple of demonstration videos. The first one, this is the sort of thing that you see in, you see this in hotels, right? These are very cheap. This is now, that was locked, but all it took was a bang on the top. Now you're probably saying, no, I definitely, and now I hope no one has one of these protecting critical kit. These are typically reserved for hotels, but it just highlights the point that safes aren't safe. But then we do actually have some more advanced to show you. So this is a Sentry safe. A lot of sites that we've seen will use something like this to protect their stuff. But the fact is, to open this safe, you don't need to figure out the code. You don't need to do something that you'd see in Ocean's 11. In fact, in any of the Ocean's movie, I've never seen them use a rare earth neodymium magnet and a sock. But the fact is, that's all you need in this case. Now, credit where credit's due, Sentry actually fixed that, and then they released another model. So it wasn't vulnerable to the same thing, so we actually had to like buy one of these. But this highlights the point that you do actually need to test these things and the bypasses, because this attack wouldn't work the first time, but what we can see is a slight modification by dropping it. Then we're able to open the safe. It also shows you here that actually, like, make sure you bolt your safes down, because a safe certainly isn't safe if someone can pick it up and run away with it, right? So bolt your safe down. But the point here again is, it's like, people might assume safes are safe, but that's not always the case. Some people might say that secure RJ45 interlock devices are safe. My mother would say, if you had a couple of teaspoons and a few scones, and an hour in the afternoon, not even an hour, like 2 seconds in the afternoon, you'd be able to get around that. Again, using 2 teaspoons. Something we see here, which is a secure lock. We actually have a video shortly that will show that one, but here, again, a cabinet. It's not a grey sense cabinet. This one we can just pop open with a screwdriver. Again, we see a bunch of ports, we see a bunch of interesting stuff. We can start linking out safety devices. We can start, causing trouble, depending again on what our intent was. So really, a lot of this stuff that you see in the store, often isn't even fit for purpose. But it really is a disaster waiting to happen because in these environments, there are harsh chemical reactions, super high temperatures, very high pressures, mechanical components, software components, and physical attacks like Aurora that can destroy operations in milliseconds. So it's really not a recipe for Granny's apple pie, it is a recipe for disaster. And on the right, you can actually see a unit that we've over pressurized and blown up through a proof of concept attack. But to summarize all the 5 steps so far, we'll actually have a look at a quick case study. So we were bought into an extremely well-known car company. They produce 10,000 pounds of product every minute on each line. We didn't want to attack levels 4 and 5, like the IT network, because as I've shown in previous slides, like with 76% of systems having security misconfigurations, like we're just going to assume your IT network is breachable because like it probably is, almost certainly. There's very few exceptions. Companies actually know that well. So we're just going to assume that someone can gain entry via your IT network. So we wanted to attack the lower level stuff. So we wanted to spoof sensors. Let's say we wanted to like emulate PLC devices and shut down lines. So that's what we did. We crafted our kit. The first part of this assessment was covert access and entry. This was easily achieved by cloning access cards, not with this. This wasn't around then, but we've got another piece of kit. But also lock picking, a few gates required us to pick the locks. Then we were met with CCTV. Now, thankfully for us, this was deployed in a way that obviously didn't have anyone that with any experience like oversee the installation of the system, because there was an abundance of blind spots. So again, when you're installing camera systems, like you have to remember, like they have a field of view, right? And so you might actually be well outside of that, the areas you want to cover. So again, really give this some consideration. So to sort of put it all together, this is actually our pre-lab session. So what we're doing here is we're doing steps. We've already identified like what our goal is, what we want to attack. So we're now at steps 2 to 4. You hear this secure lock, easy to pick, no problem, fell over in seconds. Here we have a safety device, we're linking that out. So next time the engineer relies on a safety gate to stop the process, not gonna happen. We looked at all the major PLCs, a lot of these, we wouldn't even call them exploits, we just need to like talk their language. 4.0 technologies. And here's actually the final proof of concept before we took it onto the production line. So really what we're looking to do here is stop the line because of their status check before operation. It basically means that if we can take it down, well, when we took it down, that took less than 5 seconds. The status check before operation took 120 minutes. That's it, it's killed, it's a bit of an anticlimax, but basically, it just shows you that like with a very small amount of kit and arguably not even that much knowledge, bad people with bad intent can like cause real problems. And again, like I just want to say, like a lot of these are contextually dependent. So for people that are non-technical or like not security centric, don't worry, don't be, going to anyone in the company and saying, hey, we've got we've got solenoids, we're screwed, that guy's got a magnet. In fact, a lot of this stuff is massively contextually dependent. Again, going back to what we do and specialize in, which is adversarial emulation and full impact based testing, then really it comes down to like where is the impact here? In some sites, the impact could mean loss of life, physical injury to workers. In some places, impact could be economic. In other places, impact could be political. So really it comes down to that. Then of course it's contextual based on the equipment you have. Then it's contextual based on people that are targeting you. Then it's contextual based on the people that are targeting you and their resources that they have. So again, what I'm trying to show really is just a very high level overview of the types of tactics and tradecraft. But again, like just because there are some things that we've seen here, like doesn't mean that you're automatically insecure. But the flip side to that is just because you have a firewall from vendor A or B, that also doesn't mean you're just secure out of the box. You really got to check these things. So quite honestly, the best way that organizations can mitigate these cyber and physical attacks is continuously assessing and improving your detection, prevention, and response capabilities. So don't believe the vendors, actually check it and verify it. Don't believe me, check it and verify it. Don't even believe yourself. You know, we're all human. Check it and verify it, right? But it's massively important. And you know, if you engage in this continuous security mindset, like that's how you're gonna win. So I often say like security is like a Rubik's Cube, right? So some people think security is a snapshot in time. Hey, I'm gonna buy this product and I'm gonna put it in front of my organization and we're gonna be secure. The fact is that an organization's security is like a Rubik's Cube. So like, that's what it looks like. This is our snapshot. By tomorrow, there's a vulnerability has been released. In fact, there's been 2. And by the morning comes, there's been a change request. 2 new ports have been opened on our firewall, right? And by the way, there's an insider threat. And lastly, but not least, a nation state has decided to attack us. So literally in the space of 24 hours, since we left work yesterday and came back today, the snapshot of our operational security status has massively changed. So security isn't a fixed point in time. There's no magic bullet. So the one thing that you can do that's going to make a lot of difference is continuous assessing and improving those capabilities. Another thing when you're continuously improving and assessing is to look at something and say, like in this case, there's clearly a lock on this door with a key, right? You have to wonder why is there a lock and a key there when I can scale that wall. Maybe the point of this is a deterrent. Maybe it's to say you shouldn't be here. It looks like there's a swimming pool in the background. Maybe it's to stop freeloaders. Maybe it's just to stop people that respect a door with a lock on it, which is most people, thankfully. But there's also a bunch of people that don't respect doors with locks on them. So, of course, like gaining access, if this is there for the sake of access control, this isn't going to work. It's completely insufficient. So, of course, once you're able to like assess the security controls you have in place, it is essential that you're proactive in efforts to defend against those attacks. That would include things like deploying advanced cybersecurity and OT security solutions to prevent unauthorized access. There's a bunch of technology and kit out there that does a good job. Again, it's not a silver bullet. You can't just buy one thing. Defense is best when it's done in depth. Now, of course, you can and should employ modeling tools to help you understand the impact of cyber physical attacks. Even something like threat modeling, you know, impact and like response modeling, and understand the impact on your cyber physical systems. There's also the fact that you need to pre-test your networks and configuration. Don't wait until it's too late. You don't wait until you're in a road traffic accident to put your seatbelt on, right? You put your seatbelt on in case you're in a road traffic accident. It's the same thing with a network. If you have a critical network infrastructure that's relying on a failover or on a piece of kit, well, don't wait until it fails over to test it. So you might want to have a testing solution in place that can actually verify that it is going to fail over, that it is going to do well. One of our technology partners, Keysight, produces something that's great for this, Breaking Point. And again, what we can do, so on a project I'm in at the moment on critical infrastructure, we've actually set up a complete replica of the core energy grid backbone in a secure environment, so we can actually run these kind of tests. Again, like you don't need to replicate your whole network, right? But you can take the core network and routing infrastructure and you can put it in a lab environment and you can test it with kit like this. And I would advise that you do so, again, so you literally are not waiting for something to go wrong to find out if it actually works or not, because we have the technology to be able to verify this up front. Response, another massive area of securing these environments properly. In fact, I would say response is arguably the most important. Prevention if prevention was really effective, we wouldn't have an issue in the first place. So we have to assume that prevention just is going to fail at some point. Take my word for that, or just go Google cyber attacks and cyber incidents, and also just look at how many attacks we're seeing today were found 25 years ago and that are still prevalent, right? It's because it's very difficult to like eradicate those issues. So prevention is going to fail quite a lot of the time. Detection, that can be very hard, but it's possible. But again, detection requires investment in your tooling and infrastructure and capabilities, and also a team that can analyze these things. So arguably, to my mind, the most important point is response, right? Can you get your operations back up quickly, as quick as you can? Can you minimize business impact? Can you mitigate the effect of the attack, right? Can you stop the attack even, right? But more importantly, like, can you recover? Like, so part of response is recovery. Like, can you recover quickly? And again, don't wait until something happens to realize that actually one of your control systems is running off a SD card that was written, a program written 20 years ago, and now sadly that person who wrote it's passed away. You know, because once that's down, what are you going to do? I would say the upside to that is, like, some people, and this is slightly off topic of this slide, but I'm just going to say it anyway because I think some people out there, yeah, kind of need to know this. There's this sort of feeling that we can't touch or back up old systems, or like in that case, there are some systems, if you turn them off, you're going to lose the state of the program, or you know, the program in memory, and not be able to recover it. In those scenarios, and again, you need specialist advice and consultation, but it is actually possible to take a snapshot of the program, take a snapshot of memory, and in fact, in some cases, you can actually, rather than even sort of remaking the program, you can quite often with new emulation technologies, you can actually just run that snapshot in like a harness, and that will run. That's extremely advanced, but it's possible. So just don't give up hope. And again, feel free to reach out if anyone is going through these types of things. So now you can respond. It's important you have a well-developed and tested cyber incident response plan, which is essential when you're faced with an emergency. Again, in the case of things like ransomware, the amount of people that I see that will just unplug systems in the event of a ransomware, that may or may not be a good idea. But again, you need a response plan to figure that out. A good idea for it might be that this system is attached to a really critical one, so I'm going to unplug it to stop an absolute disaster. That's an obvious reason to unplug it. A reason to not unplug it might be that, in fact, this ransomware, still the key, the encryption key that was used to encrypt your system, still persists in memory. So it may be possible that if you don't shut it down, and if you don't start doing tons of stuff on it as your incident response, if you carefully forensically image that system, you may be able to recover the key, and you may then be able to decrypt your systems, right? That's just one example, but again, it's just an example to say that only you know, based on good planning and testing and analysis of your response, only you know if you should unplug things or not, right? But really take the time to understand the intricacies of such decisions. You definitely need to be sure operations can resume as quickly and safely as possible. So again, perhaps using technologies to reduce the time for your status check before operation. Ensure your plan is up to date and that you test it regularly. That's massively important. I recommend at least every 3 years, ideally every year if you can do it, but do a tabletop exercise response testing. Remember the old adage, if you can touch it, you can own it. So identify these points of weaknesses, these physical points of weaknesses. Identify and secure your remote access points. Again, if one of your engineers can remotely access the system, so can an adversary or someone with bad intent. You need multi-layered defense. So don't just rely on key-based authentication from VPN. Don't just rely on a VLAN, virtual local area network, have defense in depth, have the key-based authentication, have your VLAN, have your endpoint detection and response, have your network security monitoring, layer it up, stack it up, stack it up, stack it up, because it just makes it exponentially more difficult to compromise a target for the adversary without them getting noticed and without you being able to like minimize the impact. So really what I'm saying is don't rely on a single point of failure. Again, if this gate was put in to stop people driving down that road, well then it's failed, because as you can clearly see from this picture, people just drive around it. So this system is failing to provide proper access control for that road. Really, I can't see a reason why else it's there. So I would think this thing's definitely failed. But yeah, maybe they had some extra money in the budget and they just wanted to put it there. I don't know, but it makes no sense to my mind. So just make sure that you're not deploying a solution like this in your environment that someone can literally just drive straight around. So what is helpful is fencing, lighting, intrusion detection systems, cameras, access control devices, and barriers. Again, stack it up, layer it up. If I see a 18, 15-foot fence with barbed wire at the top, yeah, maybe I could scale it. Do I want to? No, not really. If I see night vision 360 motion tracking cameras, do I want to try and find blind spots? No, because they probably aren't going to be anywhere because they're motion tracking. They're going to follow me. They're going to see in the dark. They're going to be very intelligent. So again, like layer this stuff up and it's going to provide you sufficient defense. Once you layer it up properly in depth, you can actually start to exponentially increase your defense posture and just make it so that you're not the target, right? Because your competitor is a softer target than you. And really, that's ideally what you want. I don't mean it like that, right? But like when you're looking to defend your organization, it's probably much better that they look somewhere else than keep looking at you. You need to limit the exposure of system information. So you have to ask yourself, from where and to where is that data flowing? Are the communication pathways documented? How is it secured in transit? Again, a misconception I see from people is encryption. They say, oh, it's encrypted end to end, so it's safe on the endpoint. Well, no, that's end to end. So end to end encryption protects stuff in transit. Encryption at rest protects it at rest, but it doesn't necessarily encrypt it in transit unless you keep it encrypted. And then you have things like full disk encryption. But the point is like once you boot something on and you enter your password and you decrypt the drive, it's then decrypted. It's not encrypted anymore, right? So think about that in the way it's secured, right? Like these things, they don't always do what you think it does. And in a lot of cases, you really have to look at what it's doing and get an idea for that. Then look at the network standards, the data destination, the vendor agreements. Is the data shared? We've actually seen security-related incidents where development companies have had sensitive OT data that they've been given by like someone in the company to produce like a dashboard, but that ends up becoming a security risk. No ill intent from anyone. It's just probably a lack of understanding. Again, not their fault. They don't know what they don't know. But it is massively important to reduce that attack surface by proactively limiting and hardening your internet exposed assets. Really, if you don't have to connect it online, don't do it. You want to establish a firewall and a demilitarized zone, a DMZ, between the control system and the vendor's access point and devices. And ideally, you want network security monitoring in place in between those points. Because again, it comes back to like security management. You can't manage what you can't measure, and you can't measure what you don't gather. So how can you manage your OT security and network security if you're blind? The short answer is you can't, right? To my mind, you can give it a go, and you might get lucky, but you're not managing it from a scientific point of view. You really need to add additional security features to the system as needed. Don't assume one vendor has a monopoly, and you can quite often offset the risk of one system by putting proper systems in place that will make up the shortfall. Consider penetration testing to validate the system's security with unknown access and vulnerabilities. a word of caution here, not all pen testers are built equally. What I mean by that is if you have a pen tester that comes from an IT environment, they might come in and launch some tools which are just going to kill an OT environment, right? Literally knock stuff offline. So first of all, make sure your penetration testers have experience in this domain. And arguably, something that's better, if you can, is to actually set up a network that's dedicated for security testing. So to replicate your production environment in a secure environment where you can actually go and test these things. Review your configurations to ensure they're configured safely. Change all your default passwords throughout the system. Where possible, patch your known and exploited vulnerabilities wherever possible. Continuously monitor remote logs, suspicious accesses, aggregate your logs for easy monitoring. You must restrict tools and access to tools and scripts. Identify your engineering and configuration and diagnostics tools. Remove all the non-critical ones. Again, I can't tell you how many times I've gained access to a system or done what one might call nefarious things, but with good intent. You know, using these network diagnostics and administration tools, they're very handy for you, so they're very handy for us. They're even handier for an adversary. And in fact, there's a lot of nation state attacks that have relied on these vendor and diagnostics tools. Conduct regular security audits. You know, validate your connections, your serial, your modems, your wireless, right? Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not a risk. Review your patching procedures. Confirm storage of gold copies, your OSs, your firmware, preferably in an actual safe bolted to the ground. You know, in a separate area. I'm probably overkill when it comes to this kind of stuff, but there is a good balance somewhere in between. Verify removal of non-critical systems, audit your full inventory, and really look at things like CISA and ICS mitigations and best practices. Like NIST have been producing for a long time. These guidelines, these are great. Honestly, like if you've got time, check these out because they're full of absolute gold. The fact is, like most people just like these people spend a lot of time putting these together, and they really work. Like if you put them, you know, if you put those in place, to really like go check these out. There's also a lot of good books on the subject. SCADA control systems security. This is good. You can see I think it's good because I've highlighted tons of pages over the years. This is another good one. There's tons of good ones. So just grab like NIST 882 resources or some of these resources and really put those mitigations and best practices in place. And then monitor your systems and logs and your network in real time. That's a much more difficult thing to do. Typically, when we do operational security audits, we'll put network security monitoring, or what we call NSM or IDS, intrusion detection systems. We'll typically put that in the goal for years 3 to 5, because the fact is most companies that we look at, you need to address things like default passwords, like flat networks, like vulnerabilities and patch management first before you get into this. And I know that goes contrary to what I said about seeing it and managing it, but you're always going to be plugging the hole in your bucket, so to speak, if you start off monitoring whilst you have all this kind of stuff. If you've got the resources to just implement it all in one go, then great, good for you, go do it, because like it's definitely worth it. And finally, implement a dynamic network environment, deploy additional firewalls and routers from different vendors. This is a good one to know because, again, like if you have the same vendor, it's easy just to rip through your network. It's essentially flat, even though it's not. One issue is going to affect them all. Modify your IP address pools, replace your outdated hardware, upgrade your operating systems, and install and upgrade commercially available security packages that's available. And finally, my last point, but it's the most important point and the biggest takeaway: don't worry, be happy. And I really mean that because yes, some of this stuff is a lot. Some of the impact and seriousness is critical, and it's critical infrastructure. It's very serious, but at the same time, we're not going to get anywhere from fear mongering, from worrying. Right, we're going to get somewhere by pragmatically assessing the situations, by recursively analyzing our security posture, by sharing information, by sharing intelligence, by having discussions like this today. And really, that's how we're going to make a difference. That's how we're going to push the bad guys back, and really tip the scale in our favor. But you know, we're only going to do that if we don't worry and we're happy. So I think I want this to be my biggest takeaway today. And then finally, here's our email address again for anyone that wants to reach out and talk security. As you can imagine, or probably have already seen, I could talk about this stuff forever, and I'm happy to. So please do reach out and feel free to ask any questions that you may have.
Awesome. Well, I will keep you talking a little bit here, Matthew. So I got a couple questions, and then we'll kind of, if anybody has any more, I'm just checking the question bin. Please chime in now. But let me just start with a couple. So you know, we started off talking about threats. So let's take a hypothetical. Let's say I'm a small manufacturer, right? Maybe located in Iowa. What is that actual level of threat? I mean, I know a lot of what you talk about applies to big corporations, you know, nation state level stuff, nuclear facilities. Like, you know, are there actually exploits happening at that small manufacturer level?
So yeah, I would say certainly, and I've seen examples of this. What I would say it's limited to in these scenarios, a number of things. Could be a disgruntled employee. It might be a sort of hacktivist, if you like, right? So you have to assume that this small company in Iowa isn't producing something that's like ethically triggering someone else, right? You might be in a certain, and we all know in the industry, there's a lot of stuff happening in industry which gets a lot of opposition, like politically speaking or whatever. So it could be simply that. There's been cases that I know of where the CEO has done something or said something bad, and that paints a target on your back. You might just have the right technology that someone wants to target and build up a botnet. And then the final one, again, as you can probably hear, there's a lot of different examples, but the most common one I see would be like industrial espionage. Have you annoyed a potential buyer? Is there a potential competitor, a really aggressive one? I have even been approached by companies that have asked me to target companies. And obviously, for the record, I always say no. But the point is that if they ask me, they ask others, and eventually there will be someone who is willing to do bad things for money.
That's it. I mean, that's a great answer. All right, so I'm going to bounce to this. This question came in a little bit ago from Paul, and I think you covered it kind of in the rest of the presentation. So maybe just touch on it, you know, just summarize it quickly. But he's saying, you know, are physically locked panels the sole answer? Are they just a full, you know, our first line of defense?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So again, a lot of the stuff that, and I'm not just saying this, I'm on a Grace webinar, but like a lot of the stuff that you make is designed with that in mind, right? So you know, it's designed to take impacts. And so yes, if you actually start to lock it, it becomes part of that defense in depth, right? You must have a cabinet that's securely attached, that isn't pickable, breakable, that you put your stuff in, and you must keep it locked for the sake of convenience. Don't leave it open because it's easy for the engineers. Actually lock it. So yeah, it plays a massive role. Each part does, but especially once someone's breached your perimeter and they're inside, that stuff matters the most.
Yeah, no, I think I'll just piggyback on top of that and say, that said, right, I mean, a lot of what you discussed there is if you have a network technology inside that panel, you don't necessarily need physical access to exploit it, right? I mean, is that a true statement? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. All right. So let me probe one other thread and just see if anybody else chimes in here. So obviously, I spend a lot of time in the IoT world. We get a lot of questions about the safety of, you know, as companies are going through digital transformation efforts, right? Like you're bringing in new stuff that wasn't there before, you know, and we experience a lot of different, I guess, safety methodologies, from we're just going to air gap everything to like we're not doing anything. I mean, can you just give kind of a high level, like what are the 2 or 3 things that a company can do when they're thinking about bringing in some new technology like that to just, you know, protect themselves early on in that digital transformation?
Okay, it's a good question, and I've definitely got the answer to the protection part, but I first want to highlight the risk, which is often misunderstood. So like, here's the tiny like IoT device, if you like, it has a CPU, it has transceivers, right? It's capable of a lot of technology. Some IoT devices that you have will actually have more capabilities on the chipset than the vendor you bought it from has provided, right? Because you're buying this thing, but the chipset they've used is capable of that stuff. So from an attacker's point of view, like I would want to compromise an IoT device a lot of the time, because IoT companies can be soft. They may have their firmware out there that I can reverse, but ultimately, if I can get code execution on this and control the CPU, I essentially now can activate the unused parts of the chipset. I can use the transceiver. So it then becomes a device I control that has an array of capabilities for me to do stuff. So that said, flip it around, what can you do? Well, firstly, only really buy stuff from companies that take security seriously. And you can tell that a number of ways, not even related to OT. So an obvious way for me to tell if a company's serious about security is like, do they allow you to have free two-factor or out-of-band authentication when you log into your account? If they ask you to pay more for MFA to log into your admin account, and they're like, they don't take it seriously, right? Because they're just looking at security like a cash cow. So like, do they have MFA available? Do they participate in bug bounty programs? Have they had publications where they've had people review the source code, like third-party reviews? All this kind of stuff like highlights a company that is taking it seriously. So first of all, I personally wouldn't buy kit from someone that didn't have at least one of those things, right? And I couldn't tell that they're taking it seriously. The second part is like, where possible, deploy an IoT smart network, like out of band. So I say, like, if you're using like Ethernet IP, or you're using a bunch of like wired protocols, then you might want to overlay your IoT network as a wireless network. And then you say, well, how do I get the link from the hardware to the wireless? Well, then you use the network diode, right? So it's a physical diode link that can only send data one way. So that would be one type of deployment. That is not always possible, but where possible, try and do that. And then thirdly, I would say an important point is, like, if you can, or if you have a pool of customers that are all thinking of buying the same kit, first of all, go to a security company that tests IoT products and stuff, and just get them to test one kit, right? It's not your kit, it's another vendor's kit, but like, if you gave me this, Andy, and you said, how hackable is that? And I hack it in a day, well, then like, you've got your answer whether you should buy it or not.
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's see. So I see, seeing no further questions. Matthew, I think we just wrap it up. I really appreciate your time. Everybody out there, again, we'll provide kind of links to the presentation and you know, the education certificates here in the next couple days. So with that, we'll kind of close. Thanks so much, Matthew.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Andy. Bye.